Hello, listeners. This is Tom Ryan, and you're just in time for another edition of True Good Stories on Life Omni Radio, WLOR.net. You're at the right place at the right time if you want to hear some amazing ghost stories and paranormal experiences. So grab yourself a drink, tuck yourselves in, and get comfortable. But get ready to face your fears. We are True Ghost Stories, and we are calling out all ghosts. Come out, come out. Come out of your homes. Come out from wherever you may roam. Hello, listeners and chatters, and thank you for being here with us tonight. We at True Ghost Stories would like to add substance to our show, more questions, answers, stories, and research. The only way the world is going to know the truth about the paranormal is if we find the truth. And we're not alone. There are far too many witnesses out there with stories to tell, and it's our job to share them. True Ghost Stories approach is open-minded. We care not only about the living, but for the spiritual world as well. And maybe through our journeys we could figure out why they're here and what they want from us. Or perhaps we can even help a soul cross over. Because we are True Ghost Stories, and we like to think outside the box. My name is Tom Ryan, and I'm one of the hosts of True Ghost Stories. And I'd like to bring on my partner in crime, Mr. Adam Ginsberg. Hello, Mr. Ginsberg.
How are you, man?
I'm doing good. What's happening? I'm feeling a creepy mood tonight. That music set me up,
That was a nice surprise that you floated in there, and it really set the tone for where we're going tonight. I know right. If we have some regular listeners out there, then they're anticipating what's about to happen tonight, because we kind of have a part 2 happening here, don't we, Tom?
Yes, we do. We do. Last week we had Marcia Becker on, and she was talking to us about the paranormal experiences and life experiences, basically, that changed her life forever. And then suddenly, like an apparition from nowhere, her husband Ed jumped on the line and put his 2 cents in, and we were intrigued. And so Mr. Edwin F. Becker is going to be joining us tonight and sharing his stories. And I just want to give credit where credit is due really quickly. The opening song was called Open Door, and that was by Jersey City police officer and good friend of mine, Andrew LeBruno, who was also in my film Faces. Anyway, that was his music. But let's get back to Edwin F. Becker and his experiences. He is on the line with us tonight. Ed, chime in.
Good evening, Tom and Adam.
How are you, Ed?
Good. Ready for a program.
Excellent. Well, last week we were on with your wife, and you did jump in. We were talking about, I guess, the basis for your book that now is going to be a second book, True Haunting. Why don't we kind of jump right in where we were, if you don't mind? This is True Ghost Stories, and I know we were kind of pushing you a little bit, but time was running out, and I think we were kind of getting to the meat and potatoes of some of the experiences that happened. Maybe you want to kind of refresh everyone real quick on the logistics and then jump in?
Sure. We had the distinction of buying a haunted house back in 1970. At a time when there were no haunted houses, and you didn't have internet, and you didn't have all the things we have today. And aside from that, I was kind of immune to the feel, simply because I grew up in Chicago in a rather poor area, and I had bounced back and forth between my parents, who were separated. And in Chicago, or in any urban city, I've talked to people now in Brooklyn and other areas, other cities. If you have these buildings that are 100 years old or so, point one out where someone hasn't died in there, where they usually have wakes in the front room,
right?
For Christ's sake. Well, we moved in, and we had just had the baby. I mean, literally weeks before we moved in, and it became active. And I was not a believer at all. So I mean, not only was I not a believer, the only image I had of ghosts were of Casper the Friendly Ghost, or the ghost of Mrs. Muir, Topper. I don't know if you remember Topper. I'm a pretty old guy. So they were friendly images, and when my wife started speaking of things happening, today I've always felt guilty about some of the things I did back then. But I kind of wrote it off. I figured, here's a woman that, her and I had been active for 3 years, having fun, and now she has a baby, and she goes through chemistry changes, and she's never been locked up for in the house all day, and I figure she's going
postpartum depression. You thought it was postpartum depression or something like that?
Yes, yeah, exactly. I figured she's going through changes. And, so at first she'd say this happened or that happened, and I would say, yeah, sure, And it took a while. One thing about ghosts, and it's something that I know when I talk to other authors or I talk to other people who've experienced these things, ghosts are not frightening in the respect of, let's say, Hollywood. They don't come out at you out of the closet and go boo. Or a Frankenstein monster doesn't come walking down your stairs. They play on you, and they grab your energy. And my energy at the time as a young man was anger. I'd get upset. And so all of a sudden, I'd wind up, one of the symptoms, if you walk into an empty house, and Marcia and I can both feel a presence today. We're both very, very well sensitive to it. One of the symptoms is a hot flash. If you walk into a building and you're buying this house and all of a sudden, wham, you feel kind of aggravated or agitated for no reason, it's sending you a signal. And that was my trigger. Okay.
So negative energy you're talking about, you could basically come in and there is a negative energy that will influence the people. Now, does it influence everyone differently, Edwin? Like, would you be influenced differently than Marcia when you walked into the place? Would she also feel a negative influence where it would play on her anger, or would it play on her fear? Or
it played on her fear, which I didn't understand at the time. Growing up in Chicago, I was afraid of people. I wasn't afraid of airbags, and I used that term long before airbags were ever invented. I used to tell Marcia, they're just a bag of air. What the hell are you afraid of? Right. Until you realize, it wasn't until it seemed like everything I did. This was a family that owned this building. They built the building. They had a sense. What today's people don't understand is the sense of domain that some of these people had. When they built the structure, they were going to live there. Their kids were going to live there. Their grandchildren were going to live there. They owned that building. Unlike us, where we'll sell something and move into a townhouse without thinking, that wasn't their intention. So we were the first ones that were not family that lived there. And the first thing I did was probably really tee them off, because we found after I bought the place, the apartment where the fellow had passed away that we were going to inherit on the second floor was filled with rubble. It looked like it had been vandalized. And from what I understood, the family did vandalize it. They were looking for money and stuff. The fellow was known to hide his money in those years. So I just called it basically a second-hand store guy who I met who lived down the alley, and I said he wanted actually a concrete mixer that was in the backyard. It was a hand mixer, and I said, you can just have it if you take everything out of the apartment. Just take it all. Okay, well, as a young man, not knowing anything about paranormal, I had no idea whether the spirits there had attachments or not to these items. They're items. And, of course, I trashed the place with disrespect. And then the second thing I found was a shed in the basement. If you guys watched the Paranormal Witness episode, that was the true presentation. We had a shed. They were like storage lockers. And one of them, after I bought the house, still had a lock on it. So I figured, golden treasure, there's got to be something in there good.
Right.
And I opened it up, and all there was it was an early form of porn. There were nudist magazines, but the disturbing part was that he had shoe boxes full of cutouts. He would cut out women's body parts about the size of baseball cards, and he would band them all together. And there were thousands and thousands. Maybe there were 30 to 40 shoe boxes. Each of them had these bundles banded together, filled, and some of them were dated back. It went back to the 20s or 30s.
Wow.
Yeah, the guy was. My 14-year-old brother was with me then. I was 24, and he just looked at me and said, "This guy is sick." Or was sick, and his name was on everything. And if you saw the portion where the daughter actually lived with us for almost 120 days, and she was crazy as a loon.
Did you do any research on this character, on this guy?
Not. What could I do in 1970? If I took off, I'd have to go downtown. My research was with the neighborhood and the neighbors. I would have had to take off work. I would have had to fill out applications. In those years, there was no copy machines. They would have had to either mimeograph it or do whatever they did.
Right.
And then I'd have to go back down there again and go pick it up days later and take more time off of work. And they worked the same hours I worked. So it's like, and now that I'm older and wiser, okay, the research to me doesn't matter. And sometimes I find it laughable with some investigators and things like that. Because whatever you're communicating with, you can bet your buns it's lying to you. It's lying to you.
Well, let me ask you this: do you believe that what you experienced was an apparition of the former owners or tenants or people that may have suffered under his?
The one that we saw, was as solid as you or anybody else. When Martha, I saw her a number of times, and I kept pointing her out to Marcia, and then she'd be gone when I go to the window to point her out. And finally, Marcia and I saw her at the exact same time in our hallway, and she was an old woman. And the only thing I played this back a million times in my head. She wore a woolen coat. It was black woolen coat. She had a button to the top. She had gray hair, pulled back as if it were in a bun. I don't think it would have been in a ponytail, but my assumption. Because we were at the top of the stairs and she was at the bottom, I couldn't see her shoes. So had I seen her shoes, which may have been laced, I would have been able to date her somewhere. But I couldn't see her shoes. And then she just went into the alcove and disappeared.
Who do you think she was, Ed?
Well, the psychic pointed out that it was the mother, but she didn't look that young. She looked older. If I had to guess, I would have dated her in the 1890s, but she could have been in the 1940s. I don't know,
Okay.
And if you saw an old woman today walking around in Chicago, let's say if you're in Greektown or one of the ethnic neighborhoods, you could easily see a woman that would appear identical to that in this day and age. So the thing that I have a hard time communicating to people who are ghost hunters is that when you see a solid apparition, it's not frightening, number one. There'll be no flames or stuff that, no big sounds, massive sounds and crashes like in the movies. It's a rather ordinary. It's what's frightening about it is the fact that, number one, it's spontaneous and depending upon how it appears and when it appears, it can surprise the hell out of you. But when you find out it's not real, that becomes frightening. That is a bit of a scare because then you don't know, is it there? Is it watching? Like one thing I didn't have any feeling for as a young man because I just wanted to go into denial. But Marcia was touched, and after that, she was forever paranoid.
Right.
So she would only take her baths when I was home in the evening, leave the door of the bathroom open. Her whole behavior changed because of that. And as a young man, I didn't appreciate it, and honestly, I didn't want to hear it because it hurt me actually to know that I had to go to work and I had to leave my wife there and baby, and nothing I can do about it. That's where my anger actually.
Well, I remember last week Marcia mentioned to us that, and you guys mentioned that she didn't tell you about a lot of things because You didn't believe her.
Mm-hmm.
No, you're right. I mean, there are certain things I addressed that I was able to, I considered them small victories. It would pull the plug out of the bathtub, and it would do it on a regular basis and wrap the plug and chain around the faucet. And it would waste our hot water. I couldn't take a bath. We had no shower, and so I tore out all the drain system and I put in one of those lever types, and I tightened it down to where it was hard to turn the lever, and that solved that. So when Marcia said, that was a problem, I said, I can fix it. I actually thought I could defeat them.
Yeah.
And when the kitchen light flickered, I went and tore out the wiring and put in a whole new light and bulb, and for a short period of time, everything was fine. And I thought I had a victory until they started flickering again. And I came to realize eventually that I'm dealing with something that number one, I can't even estimate the amount of energy I'm dealing with. I don't know if they're watching me. I knew they were intelligent,
Right.
Because at one point I had a tape recorder, and we were hearing audible voices and sounds, and I wanted to record them. But every time I hit record, they would stop. So I knew that either they could either read my mind, or they were watching me. And they terrorized our dogs. I don't know if Marcia mentioned we lost 2 dogs actually.
Right.
And what I found out 42 years later, a strange thing happened when I created this book. I did not want to come out in the paranormal world. So I had enough. In 1970, Marcia and I had been brutalized by the church, by our friends, by everybody they all told us to have your head examined. I mean, there was no Exorcist or Amityville or any of these other movies or any type of education whatsoever. You were just crazy, okay? And I had had enough. So when I wrote this 30 years ago, actually, the bones of this were written, my daughters passed it around and everybody read it. And eventually, with new technology, they said, Dad, publish it. Well, I gave this exact book to my daughter with her name on it. It said Catherine Higdon. And told her, go ahead and publish it if you want, but I don't want any part of it. You could say, as told to, from Edwin F. Ecker, but I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want any part of this world. Well, she didn't listen, all right? And not only that, the cover is my mock-up, the actual cover, because she knew if she gave it to the publisher and she altered the cover that they'd call me for approvals. So the next thing I knew, it was on the market with my name on it. And I was upset until I found out it was #1 in parapsychology. And then it was like, yeah, I mean, it just sat there. And I, to this day, I don't do book signings. I don't do appearances. Even paid appearances I don't do.
Right.
I won't do anything. The book sold itself. And it held #1 on Kindle for about a year, a little over a year. It held #1 in the UK for about 6 months. UK, that brought Paranormal Witness to us because they're in London. And they said, who the hell is this American? That independent, self-published American, bumped our Gordon Smith off parapsychology. So they came after us, and my grandkids made us do that segment, which was actually the first time I ever spoke in public. And some of it was very emotional. It was just therapeutic, but it was emotional.
Right.
And I didn't, I didn't talk on it. I refused internet radio for 2 years because I thought you guys would make fun of me. I just expected it, and I did not know there was such a warm, interested paranormal community.
Oh, absolutely. Ed, I want to skip back a little bit to a comment that you made earlier on. Actually, 2 of them. One of them, I believe, on my end, the audio was cutting out a little bit, but I believe you said something to the effect of, and I'm paraphrasing, but they're not nice, and they're trying to take essentially provide negative to your life and steal positive energy and things like that. At least that's what I think I got from what you were saying. And then the other thing was that I thought you had mentioned something about investigators going and getting evidence, and essentially the spirits and such are really tricking them. And what that brings me to, as far as a conclusion, and really, I guess this is going to be more of your
sir.
Why is it that whenever we're talking about paranormal activities and such, it always seems to be a negative entity? There isn't any sort of Casper the Friendly Ghost story that comes across, and I bring that up because you mentioned Casper and things like that. Thoughts?
I'll tell you exactly why. Because, I mean, this is what I've gotten in many debates and arguments with people about Ouija boards. And there's a woman out there. She's got a book, and she basically promotes the Ouija board like a cell phone, you know. And which is, you know, if I could swear, I'd say it's BS. Because what you have on the other side, if you're lucky enough or unlucky enough to open up a Ouija board, let's say, and create an opening, you have the same thing on the other side, but you can't see it, okay? If I were the warden of a prison and the yard's full of prisoners, okay, and I take a cell phone, if I took a cell phone and threw it out there and said whoever gets it can make the calls, who do you think is going to get it? The biggest, baddest guy in the yard, all right? Well, it's no different on the other side. All right, the biggest, baddest guy in the yard is going to show up at that Ouija board, and he's not going to go rawr and scare the hell out of you. What he's going to do is give you the answers that he thinks you want to hear. He's going to make you addicted. He's going to grab your energy. He wants you to invite him in, and that's where I'm coming from. That if you go to a haunted house, people do all this painstaking research, and I think it's nice and it's interesting, and I read a lot of it. But when you relate it to your EVPs, I think you're way off balance on that one. Because what you're communicating with is going to lie to you. And yes, it seems like the worse the spirit is, the more malevolent it is, the stronger it is. So I'm not saying you can't run into a nice spirit. Marcia and I have in our lifetime. We've run into some. We run into.
So what are they doing, Ed? Where are they communicating from? That you have these nice and these evil spirits communicating with the living. Are they in limbo? Are they in purgatory? Where are they that they are communicating with the living? And why? Even like if you have a good spirit, so you have a spirit, is a good spirit not rewarded with the afterlife?
I don't know. I mean, I literally have maybe 1,000 stories from all over the world. I mean, this week was number 1 in Australia. So, I mean, I get letters from Australia and from the Philippines and from the UK of ghostly occurrences, and I don't have the answer. Sometimes, suicide is a thread that runs through these. Sudden death is a thread that can, and I could talk firsthand about that because I've been clinically dead twice in my life. Once at 19 and once at 62, where my heart stopped, and they had to shock the hell out of me, and then they have to, in case you don't know it.
I actually saw that in your bio.
Yeah, if once they shock you so many times in an ER, if they want to really crank the voltage, they have to get permission, and another guy has to come in and do it. Well, I went to another guy. But my experience was that I never passed out. So when I awoke, I was angry, and my daughter was there, and she was crying, and I was cursing, and I said, "What the hell's wrong with these people?" They kept asking my name, and I kept shouting my name, and I saw everything that went on. And she said to me, "Dad, you were unresponsive." And I said, "I couldn't have been. I saw the guy in the red surgical thing come in, and they had to get his permission to go above, I guess, 380 or 360 or whatever."
Right.
Well, now I think back, was I a ghost? So you can have all these things. I don't know what keeps them there. And in fact, I wrote a blog in the UK. They wanted me to contribute a number of things, and one of them was I spanked the investigators because I said, you guys go into a place, you get some recordings. For the most part, you keep it to yourself and you run out. No one's asking the questions. I mean, if you guys as radio hosts, I mean, you're a professional radio host. If I were a ghost, think of the questions that you would ask me.
Of course.
You'd want to know, where am I? Is it cold there?
Right.
Are you mobile? Are you fixed there? Are there others like you?
That's right.
Can you communicate with each other? all these different questions. Do you believe in God? Did you miss the white light? How long will you think you'll be there? You know, no, I don't hear the investigators asking the right questions.
Right, and this is what we want to know. When people say that they communicate with the dead, it always baffles my mind that they don't ask the most basic questions, like, what, you know, where are you? Why are you there? And is there anything else beyond?
Right.
It's always more trivial things that are so silly that it just boggles the mind. I don't understand it.
Yeah, it's always it's always, if you're here, can you show us, or can you do something, or something like that, like a parlor trick. It's never let's have some sort of a dialogue with the other side.
Right.
Exactly. I mean, you guys are spot on, and it's something that aggravates me because Marcia and I, a wobbling lampshade or moving drapes doesn't impress us. We know they can do. We know they can do that. We know we've heard audible sounds, so EVPs don't impress me whatsoever. Find out, you know, when this book came out, and I was afraid to come into the paranormal world. We only had TV. I didn't know anybody or anything about ghost programs.
No, there was none.
So when people mentioned certain celebrities, I didn't know who the hell they were. And then they started using acronyms, and it was Alex Mitsua, who was with the paranormal something A&E's group, that I was on her program, and beforehand she gave me an education, told me what an EMF was and what an EVP was, and all these different things. And I didn't understand it because I told investigators recently on a program I was on, your best detector is your body. And if you even before you feel anything, if you were to wear a simple pulse oximeter on your finger, let's say, it'll show your pulse. Now, assuming you're not a excited, thrill-seeking investigator that runs in the house and you're getting excited about seeing a ghost, but assuming you're a professional and you walk into a building, your fight or flight mechanism is going to be triggered if there's a spirit in there before you even feel it. So let's say if you walk in there and you've got a walking pulse of, let's say, 75, your flight or fight mechanism is going to kick your pulse up to 80, 90, 95 right away, and you won't feel it.
Right.
And that's your body telling you that there's something here. Okay, and then it'll go to the next level if it's a very, very strong entity.
So Ed, do you believe that even a person that might not be particularly touched or gifted would be able to sense a presence physically without even knowing it? If they feel agitated, if they feel hypersensitive in some way, they might not realize it, but they might be experiencing a paranormal presence?
Oh, absolutely. They just don't know. Many times, probably, much like me at age 24, I didn't know how to interpret them.
Right.
I had lived in dank basements with my father, and I had lived in deserted old buildings, and had been a street kid, so much so that the state took me away from my parents, and I wound up 4 years in a Catholic institution. But I had experienced the goosebumps, and I had experienced ringing in my ears, and I experienced all these things, but they were normal when you're in that environment.
Yeah, well, that's something I'd like to touch on a little bit, is that you bring that up, and if you don't mind, when you were a child and you were in that institution, do you think that somewhere subconsciously that maybe somehow you might be more prone to believing in the afterlife because of your religious upbringing, as far as being in that school for those years?
I was brought up traditional Catholic, and I'm a fallen Catholic now, so I severed ties with organized religion actually at Campbell Street, because I tried to get the house blessed, and the priest, number one, they scared him off. So if you watch Paranormal Witness, they misrepresented a little bit, because it was a house party. It was my daughter's christening. We had about 14, 15 people there, and the priest lifted the holy water dispenser to start the blessing, and it crumpled, shattered, a brass dispenser. And
shattered into pieces?
Yeah, it didn't explode. It didn't make a big sound. He just raised his hand and boom, water and brass fell to the carpet, and he was attacked. Now he knew he was attacked. We didn't. I didn't. Marcia had a suspicion. I think she was maybe the only one that her and my one aunt did believe in the supernatural. So they may have had a suspicion. I certainly didn't. I was an altar boy, and I figured something went wrong. That utensil was probably broken already.
Right.
I rationalized everything for the first number of months we were there. But when I went to get and he left right afterward, and the spirits, when you do something like that, they became more active because we declared war on them. And then I went to the rectory to get the priest to come back and bless the building, and he refused. And I lost it as a young man, and I eventually he baited me. He knew how to play me like a radio. So he baited me and insulted me until finally I just, cursed a blue streak, and he kicked me out of the parish, told me not to go on the grounds.
Why did he refuse? Did he sense something, or did he just not want to be involved in an exorcism or an investigation?
Number one, I don't think they have any knowledge, or they didn't have then. Yeah. It's one of the things Marcia and I laughed at when we watched the movie Annabelle. They went to the priest, and he was all understanding. It was like, that's a bunch of BS.
Right.
The priests were not understanding. They were afraid. They were in fear. And the Catholic religion doesn't teach you anything about. It wasn't until our dilemma that I realized, they'll teach you about demons and going to hell, but they don't talk about and angels and visions and miraculous things.
Yeah.
They don't talk about ghosts. There's no G word in the Bible.
Yeah.
At least in the New Testament, the Catholic Bible.
Right.
There is none, and he didn't want to deal with it. He was, I believe, he was fearful.
Okay.
And left us on our own. Well, where did you go in 1970? Marcia, we were very lucky that Marcia somehow connected with Joseph DeLuise. He was a nationally known psychic.
Yeah.
And he attempted to get a Catholic priest, Father Joe Wood, who had a radio show, to help him, and Father Wood said no because the protocol would have taken months.
Okay.
So he said get someone else. He recommended an Anglican priest from UK, Reverend William Darrell Davis, and they decided they were going to try to cleanse the house. Now, what they did, it was 3.5 hours long, the ceremony. I'm probably going to release some recordings of things that were heard during the sermon that were on the tape that we did not hear.
Okay.
So there's actually a voice that's on the tape that we didn't hear. But for 3.5 hours they tried it, and there was no formula like today for cleansings. And you had a psychic and an exorcist, which is like oil and water. A psychic opens his mind to a spirit, and an exorcist does the exact opposite. He builds a wall of prayer.
Right.
So the two of them, even though the only reason the psychic brought the exorcist in because he felt there was he knew there were at least 5 spirits there, that at least 3 were malevolent. One was something that he didn't want to deal with, so he brought the exorcist in, and it failed. It was a huge failure.
Ed, let me ask you a question. When it comes to that has to feel almost unreal at that point.
Adam, we lost you for a second there. Can you say that again?
I said maybe I'm speaking from someone who's watched 30 years of horror movies and such, but bringing in an actual exorcist to take care of something almost in my mind would seem fantastical.
Well,
right.
Today it would scare the hell out of you, okay? But in 1970, I didn't know what an exorcist was.
Mm.
There was no talk of exorcists, not on TV, not in the church, not anything. So when he brought in an exorcist, it was like, okay, he's an exorcist. I did not know what that implied, actually.
Do you have to pay these guys, Ed? Do you have to pay the priest to come as an exorcist?
No, they did everything.
Just
that's the only reason.
volunteers.
Actually, it's the only reason that NBC footage exists, because when NBC contacted us, I refused. I didn't want to be on TV. I was a fledgling, coming up in the computer business, working in Logic. I said, I'm going to have people pointing at me like I'm nuts, because everybody did. Everybody, called us nuts. People asked me about disclosure. Did you have disclosure? There was no disclosure, and if I could have written on the house, this house is definitely haunted, and they would have carted me away, and the police probably would have gave me a ticket for defacing property. The neighbors would have gotten mad. There was no such thing, and so no, we were ignorant, and I was skeptical of everything these people did. Because we had two groups that Marcia was able to find. The first group were charlatans. They were just charlatans. They were laughable. And the second group, they were serious. And
were these local clergy, or did you bring people from farther away? Or when you say that you found the first group was laughable and
well, they were local charlatans or ghost hunters or
right,
the equivalent of fortune tellers or something like that. And there was one woman within the group that I believe was gifted in that she could sense, because she got a few things right as far as location and gender of what we thought we were dealing with. The second group, he was just a nationally known psychic resident in Chicago, and had a book written about him by author Tom Valentine. And Marcia somehow located their office, called them, and they sent people out to investigate us in the building and verify what was there. And when he got all the facts, he said, "Yeah, I'll get involved in this, and I'll help you." And my book is dedicated to the man. He, in fact, I just finished writing a foreword for a woman who's writing a book about Joseph DeLuise. So I had the honor of writing the foreword for that book. But he never asked us for a penny. Afterward, him and I became like buddies.
That was actually my next question. Did you stay in contact after?
Yeah, I went on the Jack Eigen show with him. I don't know if you know who Jack Eigen was, but he was Howard Stern light of the 70s. He was a skeptical, kind of a hard-hitting, edgy guy.
Right.
And Joe and I stayed friends, and he kind of clung to us a little bit because he felt guilty. He knew it didn't work. He bless his heart, he changed my behavior because my behavior was very bad. If you watch Paranormal Witness, the thing with the door, I did that as a performance. So once I was able to find out I could tie that door closed, and that I named him Ben, and when Ben couldn't open it, he'd vibrate the door, and then I'd start calling him names, and Marcia would start crying, and she'd say, stop that, and I'd say, he's nothing but an airbag, I had no idea what energy I was dealing with or what they could do, and
so you were essentially goading, and without realizing it, you were teasing and goading and setting yourself up.
Big time, and I was affected by a rage that I didn't even recognize. I mean, in True Haunting 2, for the first time in 45 years, I interviewed my wife and said, "Tell me about your day." And I learned all kinds of stuff. I learned that when my sister was there, that she taught my nephews, one of my nephews, how to read and write, because my sister would drop the kids off. I never knew that. And then she reminded me. She said, "You were so angry all the time." She said, "You broke your guitar." And then she reminded me that, I had a guitar that I had when I was a teenager that I treasured. I was a professional musician for a number of years, which is how I met Marcia, traveling through Tulsa. But I had a guitar that I treasured, and I flew into a rage one day there, and I just broke the neck right off of it.
So you're saying, Ed, that when you were interviewing Marcia, she was telling you stories about things that had happened during the early years of your relationship that you completely forgot about because you were affected by the presence in the house?
Either I forgot or I wasn't present at all.
Aware of
like my sister. My sister and I actually didn't get along. We started having trouble because she was exploring the unknown with Ouija board and seances, and I had warned her, and we had a number of hard clashes over it.
Yeah.
And so we stayed away from each other. And I would see these dramatic changes. I'd see her once a month, let's say, and I'd see these dramatic changes. But Marcia got to see the gradual deterioration of what oppression does, depression does, possession does. She saw the whole transition in how a person starts to lose energy, how they start sleeping late, how all of a sudden their hygiene suffers. They're not going to fix. She stopped wearing makeup. She didn't start. Didn't take a shower. She stopped washing clothes. She stopped taking care of her kids. She saw this whole transition that I never saw. I got a snapshot, and I would say to her, "What the hell's wrong with my sister?" And Marcia would say, she's going through some changes. We had no idea what was going on, and what drove.
I'm sorry. So she, at some point, had also had a paranormal experience.
My sister?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, she had a paranormal experience that rode her to the grave. She never recovered.
Was that in the house?
Oh, right. That's right. I remember we discussed this last week. I'm sorry. You're absolutely right. Yeah. And now let me... This was because of an experience that she had at your house, right?
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And in fact, what was the spark that caused True Haunting 2? I had a lot to tell that is in the first book. But when we did Paranormal Witness, something that sometimes authors fear happened to me, except that I wasn't afraid. One of my tenants who I tried to locate popped out after the book was out and realized that he was in the book, and not his true name, but he gave himself away on Amazon. If you go on my Amazon page, it's the first review on the left-hand side. His name is Dan, and he gave his name away and contacted me, and I invited him on Paranormal Witness. And 42 years later, he told us about what happened in his house. I mean, Marcia and me, we fell out of our chair. We never knew anything happened. We never knew his wife wanted to leave after 90 days. We never knew that his wife left him and lived somewhere else. We never knew that after they left there, they divorced, and it ruined their marriage, that she was tormented. And with those facts, besides the accounting of that in the book, I saw a thread, because Myra was, on the first floor, she was crazy. And then it affected Ellen, our first tenants that moved in. Then it affected my sister. And then there was a story I left off. I didn't feel it added to True Haunting, which was my final tenant, Mrs. Scott. It affected every woman on the first floor. And then the fellow I gave the building to, I actually gave it to him. Him and his wife moved in the first floor. And guess what? His wife goes wacko and leaves him. So every woman on the first floor was affected by something there. And, what it was, I don't know. But I do give a pretty good accounting of it in the second book.
Ed, do you feel that your experiences and Marcia's experiences in that home pushed your relationship to the brink as well?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, Marcia actually left. At one point, she left and went home to her mom. And it wasn't like, the first question I asked her when she said, I have to get out of here, I said, are you leaving me? And she said, no. And she said, I have to leave here. And she went home to Tulsa and left me there with the ghosts. Marcia, you owe me, when I start thinking about it.
Yeah.
But it was a week, because we're going on our 49th anniversary, and we can both say, under a lie detector or a Bible, that was the weakest point in our marriage right there. It almost broke us.
Ed, I have a question for you. You've mentioned the word tormented this week, and you mentioned it last week as well when you described some of the things that were going on with your sister and I guess some of the other women. Can you give us an example I mean, I really, I almost want to visualize what that could mean. Some sort of something you saw or something that they said or explained?
One of the things my sister explained to my wife was that she cultivated with a Ouija board and seances. She cultivated a certain spirit we call Henry in the book, and at first she was amused. You know, it was almost like she felt a sense of celebrity because she could make him perform, much like I could make him shake the door. But then Henry started visiting her in her dreams, and she started hearing his voice during the daytime talking in her head, I guess, not out loud. And pretty soon she couldn't get rid of him, and he's there all the time. And he would play her piano. He'd play, I think she said 3 notes or 2 notes. And 2 o'clock in the morning, they'd hear dun 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 dun.
And this is her and her.
Yeah,
her and her husband would hear this.
Yeah, and he was. I'll never know his story, but my little brother stayed overnight there, and he, after one night, he said, "I'm never coming in this building again," and I mean, it scared the heck out of him, and some of the activity, and what Dan White told me, 42. When he lived there, I treated him. I had in my whole life, whenever I have to do something and I need advice, I go to the person. I find the person most successful at whatever it is my endeavor is. And I knew a guy who owned apartment buildings, and he gave me advice. He said, never get close to your tenants, because you can't ever evict your friends, and that may have to happen someday. So I didn't know anything until 42 years later, and then Dan sat us down and told us all these things that went on, which kind of paralleled what my sister was experiencing. And it's something we just never knew. We never knew the level of activity. And then we both laughed because he had a dog that also was terrorized. It only lasted 4 days, a pedigreed Afghan, a huge dog. And we had 2 dogs, and one dog was with us some months. And that was actually one of the... I was never stricken by fear, because of ignorance, I think. But the one thing that did scare me was I knew animals, and our dog and cat were bothered, and we had a number of occurrences, and one night the dog jumped on the bed. It was probably 1 o'clock in the morning, and she was like a wolf. She was a shepherd Alaskan mix, and she had her neck down, so her back was bristled, her baring her teeth and growling and looking at our bedroom door. And dogs are smart, and I got a little Shih Tzu, and she can send somebody out in the yard. She'll start barking, and I know someone's in the yard somewhere. So I knew this dog is seeing something, and I knew whatever it was seeing, this was a dog that if I was in the woods and a bear popped out, she'd get between me and the bear. No, without. But right, now she's coming to me. Now she's coming to me for protection.
Right.
Yeah.
And the thought of what. Now, fortunately, Wes Craven and these writers and Stephen King and that didn't exist yet, so I had no images to imagine what was there, other than I could imagine a skeleton or the Halloween costumes of the day. But it was like, what could be so horrible that this dog. And the dog ran away shortly after that. She jumped the back fence and was gone. But when animals sense it, and animals they can see these things. And most 90% are benign. So 90% of the ghosts we encounter are benign. It's the other 10% that you kind of have to worry about.
And I want to ask you. I want to ask you really quickly, because we're going to have to wrap pretty soon. But I want to ask you, since your experience in that home, have you had any other run-ins with the paranormal or any more experiences since you've left? And has Marcia or I know you say you spoke to your former tenants. Have they had any more experiences? Is it ongoing? Is it because of your initial experience 40 some odd years ago?
Boy, that's a half an hour answer. Yes, we have had, Marcia and I have had a number of experiences. And none of them horrific. None of them frightening. But we have had experiences. Our friends sometimes use us as, as their own type of gauge. If they're going to buy a house, my friend will call me and say, Ed, will you, Marcia, do a walkthrough?
Wow.
And, yeah, I'll tell you a great funny story. This is a true story. In my book, the person who helped me move in, my best friend is blind. He was blind in Vietnam. And so he's a lifelong friend, all right? And some years ago, about 5 years ago, he's buying a house, and he said, Ed, will you and Marcia do a walkthrough? So I said, sure. So we walked through the house, beautiful house. And I got outside, and he was out in the backyard with his wife, and he said, what do you feel? I told him, don't buy this darn house. And he said, you're kidding. And he said, it's got ghosts. And I said, there's no ghosts. I said, you can't see it. And I said, have your wife look straight up. And he was under one of those huge power lines that goes across your state. Right across the top of his house. So I said, you don't have any ghosts. I said, but you're sure going to get something from this. So he didn't buy that house. But Marcia and I can sense it. We, in looking for the house, I had a heart attack in Branson, and I found out that their hospital was like a third world hospital. So I had to move to Springfield. It was recommended. And in looking for a house, we saw the perfect house. I mean, it was Art Deco. It had the carport garage by the side door and the 3-car back garage. It was really a neat house. And we went inside. We thought it was perfect. She went one way, I went the other. 5 minutes later, we met in the middle, and we said, let's get out of here. We could just feel this huge, strong entity. We couldn't tell if it's good or bad, but usually when they're real strong, they're not good.
Yeah.
So when you can feel it, they're really not good. They're sending,
right.
They're telling you, this is my domain.
Ed,
so,
now, not to cut you off, but now it's your time to tell our audience how they can find out more about you and get their hands on the previous book as well as the new one coming out.
True Haunting, yes, 1 and 2. How do we get them?
Well, True Haunting is on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and and some select bookstores. Any type of e-books, Google and all that. I broke the e-book record with the self-publisher that I'm with, which, people say best-selling author because Amazon has all these categories. Haunted houses that are 1 level, haunted houses that are 2 levels. And you get to be a number 1 and you say, well, I'm a best-selling. I get angry at that because when I became a best-selling author is when my publisher called me and said, out of 96,000 books, yours is now at the top. You broke our ebook record. You did this, you did that. They forget that best-selling, the word selling is like the biggest part of it. But Barnes & Noble or Amazon, and the new book will be the same. I had to actually switch publishers because of I don't like people making changes in nonfiction work.
Right.
So when I released the second book, my publisher had been bought out by a couple traditional publishers, and they basically told me, quote unquote, up the chill factor. And I told them what they could go up, and I switched publishers. But True Haunting 2 will also be Barnes & Noble. People buy them. I don't promote. I've never spent a dime advertising. I believe people will be very pleased. I hope it's well received. But I am the laziest author you'll ever meet.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what.
www.edwinbecker.com, www.truehaunting.com. And there's a whole lot there. A whole lot there. And excellent. I take great pride. I'll answer all correspondence. So even if someone writes me and says, I had one person write me and say your book wasn't scary enough. I tell them I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's supposed to be the truth, not a fiction story here.
That's right. And I've taken a look at your website, and it's very interesting, and your bio as well is very interesting. And it's definitely worth a look at. And I encourage everybody that's listening into True Ghost Stories tonight and listening to Edwin F. Becker to check out his books, True Haunting and True Haunting 2. And like he said, they can be found on Amazon. And we'll also put links on our Facebook page, as we always do every week. And Ed, I want to thank you very much for coming on and for sharing your stories with us. And it's really interesting stuff, man, and just a life changer for you. And it's always something that we're very interested in. Is the paranormal is such a life changing experience, and you've definitely translated to us that it's something that's really completely changed the course of your life, I think. And,
totally.
Yeah, it will. It will change. It will change your life, and I can always tell a true survivor just by looking in their eyes.
Mm. Ed, thank you.
Yep. I'm sorry, Adam.
You're welcome. You guys, thank you for inviting me on, and thanks, Sherry. Sherry's the hardest working woman in the paranormal, I think.
She is.
I really appreciate you guys. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thanks for coming on.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Great stuff, Tom.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, it was. We'll chat about it a little bit more, but we got to wrap this thing up.
Yeah, man. Do your thing.
Something is near you. Have you ever felt tough? Do you have vivid dreams of dead loved ones? Do you see shadow people? What are they? Who are they? An angel or a demon? Or just someone reaching out? We believe someone or something is reaching out. We want to tell the world the truth. Our experiences are not a figment of our imagination. There are things that walk the earth that are unknown to us. We want to find out what they are. We want to share it with all of you. And so do they. We want to tell our stories and their stories. We are True Ghost Stories. Tune in next time. We have great guests in store for you. Listen to this horrifically talented duo of myself, Adam Ginsberg, and the illustrious Happy Ghost Hunting.
Happy Ghost Hunting.
Didn't take the easy path down this road of life. Done his share of losing faith, but nothing else looked right. Time to catches up with you, if only in your dreams. Wake up with a coin in hand and hear the ravens scream. Hear the shadows of the night. You can run, you can hide. Hear the shadows of the night. You can lose your life. Somewhere in another place, so many miles apart, he runs away from what's to come and cries out with his heart, following that highway, not sure of where to go, looking up ahead of him, and he sees the joining road. He doesn't see the stop sign there. No time to turn away. The ravens perched up.
Shadows of the Night by Ronnie Barr. Thank you for listening to True Ghost Stories on WLOR.net.